I came to know Andrew Sweeny because of a series of articles about Jordan Peterson and the intellectual dark web. He posted on Medium. Those articles, they were not only excellently written, but also tried to explore the cultural shift in which that movement appeared. We both share the sentiment, as a lot of people do actually, that the intellectual dark web is an important new tribe addressing important issues in our culture. So I invited him to the podcast and we chatted a little bit about this phenomenon, about its importance, its aspects. There's certainly a lot of more to say about the IDW than we did cover at this time. And I think time will tell if this movement itself has the ability to actually bring some higher order into the cultural chaos we face today. There are a lot of promises there, also a lot of problems, and we will see how they are doing. For now, I think it's important to see that there are people who are actually trying to navigate between the problems and fallacies of the left and right in their ideologies, offering new and sometimes old perspectives and sometimes even integrated grand narratives, which seem to have been lost with postmodernity. So I hope you will enjoy this conversation. I will post the links to Andrew's article below the description. That's it.
Well, it's interesting. Like I started to write obsessively about Jordan Peterson around the same time as you did your first podcast with him, I think.
Right.
I think it was about that time, like right in the beginning of his sort of rise to popularity. And I started to write about him, and immediately there was this huge polarization between people who just hated him, and then people who were not, It was kind of like I lost a few friends along the way, just by even speaking about him, which was a strange experience for me, because I always find them to be quite reasonable, if anything else,
Yeah, I still don't understand that phenomenon. That like a person who can be so reasonable and so clear-minded and so articulate could polarize that much. It's still something that boggles my mind somehow, because when you talk to him or when you see him in these lectures or in these public performances, there's nothing I would even consider controversial. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah, it's not controversial. It's not right wing. It's not neoconservative. It's not alt right. It's absolutely none of the labels which he gets branded with,
right.
Constantly and consistently.
Right.
And I think maybe it's because he's a man or something, and that he's speaking in a positive way about masculinity. And there seems to be this enormous wave of, I was reading Newman's book, and he talks about the castrating mother or something, the castrating feminine, right?
Exactly.
So there's this sort of, as soon as a strong and assertive male, presence appears on the scene in the age of Donald Trump, he's immediately thought of with suspicion. Right.
I like to view a person like Peterson as an indicator, like a symbol for a larger movement, a larger social cultural movement. For example, I saw 2 or 3 months ago, I saw a documentary about Picasso, and it was like from this television sender Arte. I don't know if you know it. It's one of the better channels. So
sure, yeah.
So and there were some experts which were interviewed, and they all said, well, you couldn't have a discussion about art like from 90, like for 80 years without centering the discussions around Picasso. So because it's like he was a symbol for a whole movement and for development of art and stuff like that. And, it's like every discussion I have and a lot of discussions about philosophy and where we at in our culture. And it's always revolving around Peterson. It's like a focal point of something. I don't know what it is. I would like to explore this kind of thing, maybe in this podcast with you. But I think it is a movement. It is something more than just a person.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. While he speaks about archetypes and he speaks about Jung and he speaks about being, carried away and taken by archetypes, and he's a sort of archetype, I think, in a sense, or he's animating a kind of an archetype.
Right.
And it's like almost the opposite of the Picasso archetype that you're speaking of, because Picasso represents wildness, Picasso represents the destruction of forms.
True.
And the dissembling of the world in a sense, and Peterson's sort of trying to bring it together. He's trying to bring order, but that's a sort of a reduction of what he's saying, because he talks about the balance between chaos and order. But the weird thing about, I think, his movement is it's sort of a counter movement to all the movements of the 60s,
right,
or all the movements of let's say liberation.
Right.
It's like the liberation movements are they've reached their maximum in terms of destroying the structures.
Yeah.
And now there's some kind of construction taking place, and he's sort of coming in at that point where after I guess Trump would be the maximum of sort of chaos. This anomaly President Trump, and then the Trump apocalypse and all of this, and then so you have this sort of weird president of the biggest country in the world who's like this weird male figure, and then Peterson kind of moves in as being the sort of a positive male role model in a sense, as opposed to
the good father. Yes.
Yeah, the good father, as opposed to the irresponsible father, or the whatever the archetype that Trump kind of represents.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I don't know if Picasso would be like the opposite, because I think he made like 70,000 pieces of art and was constantly on the verge of between chaos and order, so to speak, and constantly creating. So more the archetype of the artist, whereas for me and my perception, Peterson is more the archetype of the academic, of the classic liberal, of the old British school with the moderate views, something like that. I don't know.
Sure, I agree with you. Yeah. But Picasso was sort of, he was celebrating life in this, in this radical way. True. Peterson seems to be talking about human suffering.
That's true. That's true.
He seems to be. It's I guess the Dionysian and the Apollonian. You could talk about it in that sense.
Yeah. Now I was thinking in the lines of what were there historical figures who rose to fame equally fast and changed the cultural outset that immensely similar to Peterson, and there were actually like two persons coming to mind. That first was Timothy Leary. Like and more from the postmodern outset, like equally an academic.
And they were in the same department at one point.
Exactly, and like the forerunners of a huge cultural movement. And the second one is John Brown. You know John Brown, the abolitionist?
I don't know John Brown. I know the name, but
he was like a Puritan who lived 50 years of his life in obscurity till the horrendous treatment of a escaped slave led to his decision to fight the ruffians and the Southerners, and with quite brutal ways. So and his hanging, where Thoreau and Whitman and all those people like attended, that was the drop of the, how do you say that, the moment, or the instigating moment for the Civil War in the United States. So he was like a crucial figure which rose to fame and who stood up for the wrongs in a way, and instigated this whole America which we know today. And those were like those two figures which somehow in their cultural impact resemble a little bit for me that Peterson phenomenon.
Well, I thought of Marshall McLuhan, but I guess Peterson is different in the sense that Marshall McLuhan is more of an abstract thinker or a theorist. He doesn't have this kind of almost, Peterson's almost a holy roller preacher in a way. He's out there changing people's lives in a very direct way. I say holy roller preacher in the positive sense, right? It's like he's even though he's working with science and evolution, he's taken almost this evangelical quality into modernism or something like that.
Right. I don't want to particularly focus on Peterson as a person, because you have written extensively about that, and
you want to talk about the intellectual dark web.
Exactly, because there's I think if we want to understand where we are at the moment, and even if we want to understand the Peterson phenomenon, I think like a good focal point is this intellectual dark web, because I think that's an important movement in a way, and development where a lot of people participating, not just active, like there's a whole group of persons who engage in a form of new dialogue, but the amount of cultural resonance they producing is quite astonishing. So, and what is your take on that, on the intellectual dark web?
Well, in the beginning, I thought the name was kind of a misnomer. Like I didn't have too much appreciation for the group because I thought they had too much of a kind of a materialist bent. Like they were sort of a few of them were new atheists and Enlightenment thinkers, and I'm more interested in, I guess, the spiritual dimension and deeper dimensions. So I didn't see. I saw their value as a bunch of people talking and having a conversation, and I thought that was great. But I warmed quite a bit to Eric and his brother. I think these guys are really sublime and interesting thinkers.
Eric and Brett Weinstein
about biology. So David Fuller kind of pushed me in their direction, and so. And then there's a guy named Jonathan Greenhall. I don't know if you've read his stuff, but he's a friend with the Weinstein brothers, and they've been buddies for years, and he's a very deep thinker. And so in the sense, what I think that they represent is I was trying to think about this. Let me just look at my I was trying to think about this. Is what they represent is a middle ground for discussions in a period of extreme polarity after Trump. So the sort of shock of Trump and the shock of people with very progressive worldviews, seeing this person who seemed to be sort of the shadow of all their fears arise into public life, created this sort of void, right, where we have this where the media, the New York Times and the Guardian and all of these newspapers seem to their point of view seem to have become so completely formulaic and dead, and the social justice movement had become the establishment in some way. And so any kind of progressivism had become a kind of toxic place to be in. And then on the other hand, you had and you had Trump. So there was nowhere to be, no place to be. And then Peterson arises into the mix and starts having conversations with people, on both sides of the spectrum, and allowing that to happen. So, Ben Shapiro, I'm not a conservative by nature, and I've never felt particularly conservative. But it's, it's interesting to listen to, an intelligent conservative like Shapiro. Normally I would just put them in a box. And so I thought, wow, somebody's actually talking to the conservatives, and there are intelligent conservatives out there, right? And then the reasonable progressives like the Weinstein brothers, who have been victim of this social justice tribalism, but actually very concerned with helping people and distribution of wealth and all of that. Peterson's having conversations with them as well, and this sort of this tribe of a conversation appears, and all of these people, they become kind of like a little tribe, and the interesting thing is that it's so lo-fi, right? There's nothing slick or contrived about it. It's just a bunch of people having conversations, and long form conversations, and the fact of this being so huge, it's like rock star. These sort of academic types becoming academic geeks, becoming rock star figures. It's totally weird. It's like the inversion of the 60s, right?
Right.
Whereas the 60s were all about bending genders and destruction of the hierarchies and creating a new world utopia, where these guys seem to be wanting to come together to create a livable society, a livable world, and have long conversations to try to figure that out.
Right.
And so, I think they're all great. And then I did write a piece called "The Intellectual Deep Web" because I thought there was this whole. I thought that I've studied Buddhism and things like that, and so I'm interested in meditation, and so I thought this whole. I thought that their bent was more, maybe more political than it could be, even though they are sort of apolitical, and that there are other figures perhaps deeper that could emerge as well. So there was what was his name? Alexander Breiner. He had this idea called he was a guy from Rebel Wisdom, and the guys from Rebel Wisdom invited me to their men's group, and
right.
He had this idea. There needs to be an intellectual deep web, right, which would integrate all of these other aspects which are not being talked about in the intellectual dark web. Mm-hmm.
I think what you're saying is very interesting in regard that there is this dialogue, which is a dialogue which is not confined to the left or the right. And I think the towering figure of all of that is Joe Rogan in a way, because he is able to deliver for the right and for the left in a way, and has these long form discussions like 2 or 3 hours, and provided the medium in a way where all this could flourish in the first place. Right. The Rubin report and all what they are doing, it's like they all use this medium, and in a way I think it's a reaction against those in a way I think it's a reaction against the conversations we have day to day on Facebook, because it's all like fragmented and everybody has an opinion and nobody has a clue, and everybody gets like easily offended, and this is what was for the last 10 years there's nothing more useless than a Facebook communication and conversation. So
that's right.
So because nobody has
text, it's just text. People talking to each other in text.
Right.
People that has been so toxic on the human soul.
Right.
The human voice. Like I guess YouTube opens up the human voice. Right.
Right.
So people are actually having human. Their conversations.
Right.
Rather than attacking each other with these little fragments of text.
Exactly. So I think they're fed up with that in a way. And so, and then there's this medium, and Joe Rogan with his millions of listeners per podcast. I've heard somebody say he's the most famous interviewer of all time who has ever existed, because he has like so many listeners who tune in for 3 hours to listen something about archaeology or I don't know what. So,
and the weird thing is that he's not in the mainstream. So it's like a huge underground movement that's bigger than the mainstream.
True.
Like the mainstream has become the most irrelevant, place to have a discussion. Everything's happening underground, or everything's happening off stage, or everything's happening in this casual, casual way, in this YouTube, diffusion. It's like the gatekeepers are gone. Right.
Well,
they're still there, but
yes and no, because because you just wrote a piece about I haven't read it. I haven't had the time, but about this Peterson Harris debate. And if you see like the videos which are leaked, these are like thousands of people who just come to a 2 or 3 hour lecture, and consistently, this is not like an isolated phenomenon, but the people are like leaving YouTube in a way to attend to those events, which were, it's like a theater or something. You know what I mean? It's completely bonkers what is happening.
Yeah, it's quite wild that such an almost simple, almost conservative type of event, just two people talking, could create that kind of a crowd.
Exactly.
The simplicity of it is it's almost a return to a more primordial mode of conversation, I think.
Yeah, and even through the long form, you have time to explore, like especially if they're experts on their field, to explore some topics very profoundly, which is something you don't have with Facebook, for example. So I think that contributes at least in part to the development of that group of people who like try to talk about things nobody in the mainstream is talking about, or not even allowed to talk about.
Or just talking about things with some kind of nuance,
Right.
Talking about things that haven't been messaged to such an extreme and toxic, extent, we get these MTV type of news, and MTV since the 1980s have kind of gone together and become one thing, where we're getting our information in these tiny little, packaged bits. But most of but we're kind of confused. We don't really know what is going on, and we don't know what the left and right is anymore in a sense. It's like it doesn't, though, that kind of that almost that kind of duality becomes so polarized and caricatured. It's hard to see what people think on both sides, or what people feel, or what's actually really going on. And so you're doing your dishes, and you take a jog, and you're listening to Rogan, and these kind of things are compelling, oddly enough. Maybe even more compelling than Game of Thrones at times.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? It's compelling to listen to two people have a real heartfelt, deep conversation, more compelling than Breaking Bad, perhaps, Yeah,
it's a weird phenomenon. I'm astounded, because sometimes, like late at night after work, I want to see like a serial or something, like some of those things. And then I noticed like that Joe Rogan is live with somebody. And I think, well, I switch over to that. And then I'm like, then suddenly 2 hours are gone. Yeah,
that's right. Well, what about amazed? I've also noticed that it's caused me to learn faster in a different way than just reading. Because you can get a lot of information by listening. Peterson makes this point, is that people just listen to these things, and that the list, almost like the oral mode of communication has gone past the written mode of communication in terms of how people get educated.
Right.
So, so you can listen to Peterson's Maps of Meanings course and learn all about the 5 traits of personality and stuff, the kind of thing, you might have taken an undergraduate course in,
right.
but you can learn about it and you can apply it, to the people in your life and you're passionately engaged in it because, it's like I didn't study psychology in a formal way, but now I feel like I know something about it, right? and that's just that's while I was washing the dishes, not while I took a period of time out of my other things that I was doing to learn this stuff. So
exactly.
So now I know that I'm very high in openness and low in a bit lower in conscientiousness. My wife is very high in conscientiousness. Right. So we have a good team, a balance, but she's a bit low in openness. So that's why she has these views about, I really learned a lot from seeing, from Peterson's personality courses and seeing how people are very different. And I think that's the spirit of the deep web, is it a bunch of people who have highly different personality types are coming together and having, mature conversations, right? I think that's exactly right. As a reaction to this sort of, cultish, Facebook world that people have been sort of living in the past 10 years. Yeah.
There's a thesis, and I want to, like an idea I have, which I would like to formulate and think and hear what you think about it. Because I was thinking, okay. You certainly know spirodynamics and the idea that culturally a culture is developing over stages in a way. So we are more or less living in a postmodern era, and before that industrialization, enlightenment was the more modern thing, and before that pre-modern. And what I noticed that every era, when it's beginning, when it's starting out, it has a group of people coming together, and you can find that when you look at postmodernity. For example, you have like the Parisian movement with
you have Foucault and Deirdre. And
go back to the 20s. With Dali, with Henry Miller, with Gertrude Stein.
Oh yeah, those are the ones I love.
Yeah. So now I've read I've seen your article about your heroes. So these are my Parisian heroes as well. So. No, but you have like postmodernity, you have like this group of artists, and they know each other in a way, and they build, they create a tribe, so to speak. Yeah. But if you go 300 years back into the past, with modernity, you find something very similar with Newton, with Leibniz, and like where theories are created. What was it, Malthus and Darwin? For example, they had similar ideas. They were in contact in some sort. Like the media was not that developed, so they had to communicate with letters. So and I was thinking, okay, we are approaching maybe a postmodern time. Wouldn't it be to be expected that there is a group of people coming together who embody that kind of stage of development for the first time and producing the outlet and the blueprint of what trickles down into society in the years to follow? And I was looking for that for the last 5 or 10 years, and I was thinking thinking about the integral movement, but there wasn't happening nothing of that sort.
Yeah. Well, it seemed that the integral movement kind of they felt like there was something happening in the integral movement in the beginning that seemed very alive, and then they kind of retreated or something.
Exactly.
Off the world stage, and so I was very excited about the integral movement in the beginning, but now I'm wondering where they are. Like exactly. Why aren't they out there engaging with all these people?
Exactly.
Because some of their ideas are probably more advanced than the intellectual dark web, but I guess they're not hitting the culture in the guts, in the same way.
What intellectual dark web is doing is that there are people with their own platforms coming together and testing their ideas and bringing them out into the world. For example, by using YouTube. And I think they're engaging with the world. So, and my thesis is, and I want to know what you think about that. If we could think of the intellectual dark web as a tribal group emerging from postmodern consciousness.
Yeah, well, that's how I've been thinking about it as well. I've been thinking that the perfect human community, or the archetypal human community, is the tribe, and the tribe is the place where people are most alive and most engaged and with each other. And it's like the economist Shoemaker said, "Small is beautiful." When you have a small group of people, it has the maximum effect. And if each person plays a different role, right? They're not ideologically driven. They're driven just by their own particular individuality and passion, right? But if they're all different, then that has the maximum effect. And yeah, I think that's I was thinking about this in terms of Peterson's anti-tribalism, but I think there has to be a kind of enlightened tribalism, right? There has to be, like, because that to me is the way to live, right? Is small groups of people expressing the maximum individuality. Somehow human beings are meant for that. You can see that in a football game, or you could see that in a rock concert or anything. If you have a group of like 10 people or 5 people, they're the most powerful and engaging, mode, I think, of people for pushing the culture forward. Certainly, yeah.
Right.
So I agree with that. I agree with. I think these guys are on the front lines, and maybe the integral movement became too conceptual in some kind of way, and putting people in categories and deciding that somebody is green and somebody is red, and they were too categorical, and they weren't maybe passionate enough and engaged enough, and going out there and taking risks,
Right.
Somehow.
It seems to be a performative contradiction of integral, that they claim to be open and to integrate everything, but what they don't do is integrate other postmodern philosophies and have an actual dialogue with that. I mean, there is metamodernism in its different forms, which claims to be coming after postmodernism. There's digimodernism, there's performatism, and all those different ways of concept of a worldview after postmodernism. But they don't engage with that, and they stay within their bubble in a way.
Yeah,
but
well, hopefully that will change. Who knows? Maybe they're too centered around this one person, Ken Wilber. Maybe that's the problem. I don't know.
Maybe,
I mean,
but
Ken's great. I don't want to put him down in any way. But maybe they have to branch out, and maybe there has to be different personalities that are expressing the kind of strong views that he is.
No, I completely agree. But just in exploring the phenomenon of the IDW, I mean you can't find more different people than Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
So they're in every kind of way.
Well, that's beautiful. And also, even me, I just wrote an article about Sam Harris, and I was attacking Sam Harris in a sense because I disagree with Sam Harris. But I learned something from Peterson in that he went out and he's having these talks with Sam Harris on a friendly terms. And that's fantastic. That's beautiful. That's the way it should be done, rather than me just sitting and writing nasty things about Sam Harris because I disagree with them.
Yes.
Congenial, long, nuanced conversations. Without any restriction. It's kind of great. Yeah.
It doesn't lead to nowhere if you talk only to those who share the same worldview. So you need somebody else who comes from the opposite end of the spectrum to challenge your ideas and to develop those ideas. And I think that is what they are doing in a way.
What do you mean by, can you elaborate what you mean by postmodernism for me?
Well, what I mean by that is,
and how's that different from integral? What they would call that integral, wouldn't they?
They would call that integral. Yes, yeah. That's true. So for me, postmodern is a cultural stage, which is the soil from which all those philosophies, maybe integral or performatism or demodernism, are springing forth in a way that is a stage of cognitive or social development which integrates in a way the virtues of all stages below, but are able to transcend the fallacies. So, and I find it very interesting to compare those different philosophies and theories to see, okay, what is their common element? For example, from integral theory and metamodernism and performatism. Because when you look at the Dutch school of metamodernism, not that Hansi Freinach thing, but the stuff from Timothy Vermeulen. And he says, for example, metamodernism is the capacity to oscillate between the postmodern stance and the modern stance. And you're not confined to one worldview with the values and your opinions, but you are free to oscillate. And with that comes a form of creativity and optimism. I like to compare those different approaches, so to speak, so to see, okay, what is it? What is in its core postmodern? Because it's just unfolding. We don't know what it is. Nobody knows what postmodernism is, that's for sure. You know? So, but, there are some philosophies, to make it short, who go explicitly after postmodernism, say, okay, no, we want to grow beyond that. So, and what is their common element? What is their common core? I find it quite interesting. I don't know yet, but I like to explore that. So,
well, I mean, that's the thing. Is to exist in a vulnerable space where you're not burdened by ideology, and that's I think that's Peterson's main message to me, and that's the intellectual deep dark webs,
right?
What they have to offer. And then so hopefully that's, I mean, it's interesting because Eric thought of this term as a kind of a joke, right? The intellectual dark web, whereas there's nothing particularly dark there. It's like the darkness is elsewhere. The darkness is in ideology, The darkness is in sort of, rigid, fixed modes of being and thinking. And so it is kind of I'm a pessimistic person by nature, but it does feel a bit, revolutionary.
Sure.
Do you know, Jordan Greenhall has this theory he calls it he says there's the red religion and the blue church. And he says that traditional media is like the blue church, right? It has its safeguards, it has its gatekeepers, it has its official messages, it's what can be said and what can't be said, and it's been very effective, at crowd control and keeping the society from falling apart. But then at the very edges, there's the red religion, and this is where things are kind of dangerous and alive. And that's kind of what YouTube is, and not that the intellectual deep web, there's nothing particularly dangerous that they're saying or that's going on there, but YouTube is dangerous.
Right.
I think it can go both ways, right? It can go towards this middle space of conversation and people deepening people's perspectives. And of reality, and it can go in the space of dangerous ideologies being propagated, and I knew this guy who was a Stalinist. I was amazed that there's these whole communities of actual Stalinists out there, and listening to and so anyway.
No. I think you're right. I think it was Jordan Peterson who said recently that we don't know what YouTube is. Because it's like there for a couple of years, and it hasn't shown his face to the fullest yet. What is possible, and in a positive and negative way. I know because I have a niece. She's 5, and and I've read some articles how like these bots, these artificial intelligence bots, like create now children's videos. And so if you just follow some links like kids videos, you put in YouTube Kids videos. And then after you click 10 times, you come to those weird videos created from an AI, and they're quite brutal and at least not suitable for 5-year-olds. So
there's this extreme toxicity, and then there's at the same time there's this new possibility. It's two things emerging at the same moment. And what I wanted to say about YouTube is, I don't know, have you read Ivan Illich? Do you know Ivan Illich's work?
No.
He wrote a book in the 70s called Deschooling Society, and to me, that's what YouTube is doing. It's sort of deschooling society. And I'm a teacher, so I've noticed that students learn in a different way than they used to. Over the past 10 years, there's less of this symmetrical message of me, a teacher, speaking and giving them a lecture. They're there with their computers and their smartphones, and they have on their smartphones they have Pornhub, but they also have the equivalent of the Library of Alexandria, and so they're navigating between me as a teacher and the machine and the message, and it's all mixed up, and in one sense I think they're learning a lot more and they're super bright, and in the other sense I think maybe they're going mad, and I don't know what the answer is.
Right. Yeah. It's complicated.
So I think that Peterson has noted this as well, that education, traditional education has not adapted to the online world yet. So it's crumbling, and so a lot of the learning that people, a lot of the learning resources that people have, are really far removed from school probably, and they're, I've always been like that. My passions have, I wasn't a very good student, and I always had these side passions that I read Henry Miller and, instead of what I was supposed to be reading. But I think there's this, people are living with this very divided, attention, and the benefits are that they can, the reason people go to a Jordan Peterson lecture or whatever is because they want, it's based on their life, right? It's not abstraction, it's not it's not education as a diploma. It's education as learning, growth and learning, and that kind of thing. So that seems to be immensely positive, but dangerous times indeed.
Yeah, there's a great podcast, School Sucks Project. Do you know that one?
No.
It's like, I think it should belong to the intellectual dark web, because there are people there. Thaddeus Russell, you know him?
I've heard his name. I heard the name.
I think I had a podcast with him, one of my early podcasts, and I think he might be one of the most intelligent people I know, quite frankly. And he actually tried to have some discussions with Peterson, but they never happen. They never take place. I don't know why. Because he is an historian and he is quite critical of the school system, but he is a staunch defender of postmodernism. But he sees the fallacies of postmodernism, but he has a completely different take on the whole phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I think...
Well, I find Peterson's critique of postmodernism a bit reductive. I mean,
right.
I think that the postmodern period might be a necessary stage to go through, but also to transcend. It's like this, the Zen phrase, there's mountains and rivers, then there's no mountains and rivers, and then there's mountains and rivers again. So the postmodern thing is like, you take away all the mountains and rivers, right? But then you have to go back to some kind of reality.
Right.
So funny thing is, I was reading, I finally got around to reading Foucault when I discovered Peterson. So anyway, I'm not a huge fan, but it was interesting that I was reading Slavoj Zizek and Foucault and all these people when I came upon Peterson. And Maybe the postmodern stages. Maybe Peterson's discussion of postmodernism is a bit reductive.
Right, and I think this Thaddeus Russell, he seriously could challenge his views, because what stuck with me is one expression he had with Joe Rogan. One thing he said, for him, the postmodern stage and the postmodern advancement are the most supreme inventions humankind has ever had. Namely, the idea that, in a way, everything is a social construct, and you can have that perspective because, there are no given hierarchies, there are no given hierarchies between races or between people, that is the first time in history humankind has deconstructed these basic notions that there are differences between men, between white and black and poor and rich, or male and female, and he calls it the most supreme invention of humankind, and you have to give it to him. It's right. So, but I think Peterson is not looking out for those virtues of postmodernity. He's not.
Well, he's correct about the pathologies of postmodernity.
Right.
Certainly, yeah. But as I say, I think that perhaps he's throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting if they would have like a discussion that would prove that the way of communication is working. They have, but it hasn't happened yet. But I'm eager to see that.
It seems to be a new mode of learning, in a sense that's coming out, but through conversation. It's new, and at the same time, it's very ancient.
True.
Yeah.
No, it uses the most primordial way of communication. So, and that's the interesting thing. Where we are people who need to talk and need to hear, and have to do that in an honest and authentic way. And I think that mode of communication is delivering that.
What I would hope that would come next would be another artistic movement, because that's probably missing because they're an intellectual dark web, and then the intellect has to also, all of these other forms of expression, are important as well. Dance and music and
right.
And so I mean,
there's
you can't imagine these sorts of things, but
do you know Raoul Eschelmann?
Nope.
No, he is the originator. He's a German professor of performatism, and he has a book dedicated to the different forms of art and architecture and music after postmodernism, and that is quite interesting. So it's like an integral theory, but like not in a way model driven, but looking out into the world and seeing, okay, there's clearly some kind of architecture, there's clearly some kind of art, literature, which distinguishes themselves against postmodernism. And he tries to model that, how is it different? And it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's maybe hard to define at this point, like when you're in the middle of it.
Right. So a good example would be Life of Pi. Do you know that book?
Never read it.
So it's about, if you have postmodern literature, it's all about stream of consciousness and everything is subjective, and you never know, like if you read James Joyce, for example, it's like all in a way convoluted, and you have to,
Yeah. But James Joyce he's not strictly a postmodern. He's high modernism. He's usually considered to be high modernism because he's still working within a narrative frame, I think,
Right.
He has this musicality of words, but there's still a story. Yeah.
Right. Or take Samuel Beckett, for example.
Beckett is like the end of modernism and then moving into postmodernism where it could be anything, but
right. The problem with postmodernity is that there's no real consensus about what it is, when it started, and what, I think from an historical point of view, you could attribute, for example, Joyce as being postmodern, although I think from literary theory, he's modern.
He's considered high modernism. I studied a bit of literature, and so is Beckett. They're considered high modernism, like the end of modernism, kind of.
Right.
Ultimate extent of, like, Joyce is the ultimate. He was the ultimate. He used language to its ultimate musicality, I think. Nobody ever, and then Beckett came along and used language as compression, the most compressed type of language, you could possibly think in, the most barren, but there's still a reference point, right? Whereas my understanding is a postmodernism is sort of post-reference point.
Yeah, but if you look Finnegan's Wake, there's no reference point in there.
That's true. Yeah, I guess that's different than Ulysses. I guess he's maybe you're right. Maybe that's a good point. Maybe Finnegan's Wake he's moving into postmodernism, but it's also nonsense. It's possible to read. Maybe you can read it, but who can read that? I mean,
right.
Do you know Gurdjieff?
Sure.
A little bit. His book, Beelzebub and his nephew, you're supposed to read it 3 times. It's almost impossible to read. And the idea of the book was to break down your mental, constructions, your cliche mental, truism. Right. Just break the whole structure down, because the book almost makes no sense. So he told his students it was the most Baroque, impossible book to read ever. He told his students to read it, 3 times, and I got halfway through it.
I've read it once, all 3 parts.
You actually read it once? That's very
impressive. Yeah. No, it was my time actually when I was 20, and I was into that shit, and it was part of my worldview. I actually was not that, but this other book, like what is that? With a Remarkable Man. That book? So that was my time. I was in Paris for a couple of weeks, and in my little hotel room with a bottle of wine, and I was reading that book, and it was like fantastic. I really love that guy.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
But yeah, it's complete. The Beelzebub. I think he means something, but you really have to delve into it to to get that basic idea.
That's the thing. It wouldn't be postmodernism, because it wouldn't mean nothing. It wouldn't lead to nihilism. It would lead to illumination, right? I would say. I mean,
the works of of Gurdjieff.
Well, breaking down your mental constructions would lead to illuminated worldview, probably. Right. Like I have this idea that the mainstream media is the castrating mother, and I kind of want to. Well, maybe that will be subject for another kind of discussion, because one of my interests in all of this is I went to this men's group with David Fuller and Rebel Wisdom. They invited me over there,
right?
And what I was. I was surprised at the group, because the group was a bunch of kind of hipsters and London cool people and really into all kinds of interesting things and very cutting edge group. And I was sort of thinking, okay, they're going to be a Peterson type, so they're going to be neoconservatives or they're going to be, but it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be a lot of intelligent people are into this stuff, right? And people who are intelligent on different levels of experience, like spiritually intelligent and politically engaged, whatever. Everybody has a different. Everybody has a kind of a different. What's the word I'm looking for? Different level of communicating or understanding this stuff. And it's interesting how deep that goes. Like Some people are into Peterson and they want to just get their lives together and stop smoking pot and watching so much porn. And then there's other people who are very into the much deeper existential questions. And then there's other people who are into the esoteric Jungian archetypes and all that. And so it's quite a diverse spectrum that arises from this whole intellectual dark web community and what's coming from it. And one of the things I was talking about David Fuller. David Fuller has these men's groups, and the idea that the fact of men's groups kind of bothered me in the beginning. in terms of I thought, it just wasn't something that interests me, but the whole sexual political aspect of all this, and the fact that Peterson is sort of and the intellectual dark web, they've been kind of demonized because they're or the Peterson has been demonized because he's coming on with a very strong masculine message, and then his whole image is of the his whole thing is of the hero, the masculine myth,
right?
Is entering into the culture again, and I think this is a positive thing, and I also think that this will strengthen the feminine archetypes as well, and rescue them from this victimology, which has been plaguing the feminine world and in the media and
exactly.
I don't know if I articulated that very well, but that's just one of the things I've been thinking about.
No, the wife of Brett Weinstein, Heather Hurling is her name.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if I think, and she just wrote a fantastic piece about female toxicity. So and there as far
right.
as,
so it's this dark feminine that is not being it's not being there's the dark feminine archetype that's missing from the culture. It's not being represented. It's not being seen.
It's true. Yes.
And I think in traditional cultures there was always an image of a Kali, of a dark woman, but we have this image now of women as being these pure victims of. So I think this is, and I was reading Camille Paglia, who was a good writer, and I really think that one of the important I think that that's an important aspect of this whole conversation.
I think so too. I think you're completely right, because I was thinking, okay, how could a mature feminism look like?
Mm-hmm.
And I think mature feminism would look like to start out with the affirmation of all the virtues and privileges a woman has.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of going, the shitty patriarchy and shitty men and all are beasts, and why not dismiss them all in the first place? So let's reaffirm what being female means.
The responsibility associated with that.
Exactly. Uh-huh. And this is the article the wife of Brett Weinstein was writing, so that you can't choose clothing which highlights sexual signals and then to harass the men if they are looking. And this is like a vital point. I think they're all, and I think a lot of criticism comes from that they all have like a traditional worldview regarding sex and marriage and all the things. But I mean, they can argue for that because they are biologists and they can see where the roots are coming from.
Yeah, but it's also just these vicious attacks that you get, on Facebook or whatever from people because you're defending Peterson. It's almost like, and he's considered to be this patriarch, and there's this sort of hidden hatred of men that seems to have poison the culture, and this idea of the noble man becoming an important thing in the culture again.
Right.
Important, just as there obviously has to be an image of the noble woman,
Sure.
Uh-huh. So
no, but let's take some minutes and dive into that, because I think that is, I mean, we were starting this conversation about asking why the polarity, why does Peterson and his friends, so to speak, like invoke such deep admiration as well as deep like adversity? Why is that? I mean,
Because I think the culture just encourages consensus, you know, and if you come out and say something in a fierce, strong, masculine way, people or become afraid or something, or
right.
they see it, maybe that with violence or something like that.
Right.
Maybe
especially from the postmodern types who are more feminine and more sensitive, and they're all about like what is the like violence, violence-less communication and stuff like that. But I mean, in order, and he says so, in order to have a discussion, you have to, you know, pursue and your ideas and to challenge your ideas. That is always a little bit aggressive, in the sense that you have to approach the topic, you know.
Yeah, and the soft, sensitive guy, you know, who imitates the feminine, you know, he is at a disadvantage, you know, in the culture, and you know, not that you would want to become the alpha male type or the, you know, aggressive, you know. But at the same time, it seems, I don't know, just from my own personal experience, is that I had, you know, a lesbian mother, and I grew up very progressive, and I had very long hair, and I almost like fell in love with women by imitating them.
Right. And
so it wasn't important for me. Masculinity wasn't important for me until later, you know, that I had to break out of that. And so so I had to reestablish kind of polarities. I had the actual idea of being male became important to me again. Whereas in the postmodern sort of fog, you don't want to identify with male or female or any kind of polarity. But later it became very important to me, and I realized that we're sort of living in this fatherless kind of world in the postmodern society. Right. And again, this comes back. I started to talk about Trump because Trump is the image of this pathological man in a way, or this, you know, pussy grabbing, you know, unconscious sort of lying type of, you know, he just, and that's becomes the male figure when the actual dignified male person is put down to the extent that it doesn't even kind of exist. So I always thought that the election of Trump was the reason, or the election of Trump was as much a reason of this extreme progressivism as it was with the rise of the right. Like these, the extreme progressives and the right are in bed together in a weird kind of sense. Right. And that's this polarization, and that's this polarization where both these sides don't really make any sense, and then the intellectual dark web comes in and you know has these nuanced conversations where, you know, you can actually talk about these things again. It's almost like you couldn't talk about them before. I don't know if you had that sense, but some of these things were just, you were not able to talk about.
Yeah, well, you know the people with whom you can talk about stuff like that, but only with a hand before your mouth. Like, let's talk. You know, I think there were some things that I wouldn't have had the courage of saying before these guys came in. Exactly. I started saying them because I knew that I was surrounded by virulent progressives, right? Who would not allow for a nuanced conversation, or even to have a conversation, right, with somebody who's a little bit conservative, like, or traditional, like you know, Shapiro or somebody like that. You know, you couldn't have had a conversation with somebody like that. They were just the devil, you know. They were just, you know, evil or bad, and those are the bad people over here and the good people over here, and I think that's the essence of the thing that I like about the intellectual dark web, is this sort of space of the in between where it's you're not burdened by having to, you know, you're not burdened by all these ideological presumptions, you know, which you know, kind of fell apart for me when Trump was elected. Like, I didn't know what was, you know, it's like, I just an ordinary sort of progressive. I just follow the New York Times, and I just have these and these opinions, and
and then there's this sort of collapse of the sense making apparatus, and then but it turns out to be a positive thing, because then you can start to really think about stuff rather than just going along with whatever ideological presuppositions you're raised with, or you filter through your media world. Or
yeah, for example, a year ago you couldn't say I'm a masculinist, and I think alpha males are great. There is toxic masculinity, of course, and we should work that this doesn't get out of hand. Yeah. But the idea of an alpha male is necessary, and sure. It's of the good hero we are talking about the good father, and to say no, in the current form, I don't necessarily support feminism, although I think like women should have all the rights and privileges and responsibilities like they should have. Yeah. But at the same time, like I'm a male, I think it's good to be a male, and I think there's something to strive for.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a kind of there's a sense that we've been raised by females. I don't know how to say that. All your teachers are females, and that the transmission from the father is missing. Right. I got that feeling. I went to this men's group, and one guy asked, he said, where do you get your information from? And almost all the men there had got all their information, sexual information or just life information from their mothers, right? And that's why they were suffering so much, because they didn't get that transmission from the father. Right. And again, that's why Peterson, I think, is so powerful as a fatherly archetype, or as a good man archetype. And
it's the same with gender. I don't know how it is in France, but I know how it's in Germany. It's like, why? I ask myself, why is that a topic? Why is it important? I don't personally care if somebody identifies as a male or a female, but where I draw the line is if you start to indoctrinate little children, as it is happening now in Germany, for example. So you start with 6-year-olds or 7-year-olds and give them like this genderbread man, male, female, whatever it is, and I don't think that is a good idea, because, we all play, I dressed up, when I was that age. That doesn't mean that I was confused in a way, or that I was transgender, that was something I felt that I went through. But now with German pedagogics, in a way, it's a complete mess, because, it's the intent to form their thinking and their self-identification. And I think you just have to leave them alone,
at least children, they just have to remain children. And, if they're gay, they're gay. If they're not, they'll figure that out. They don't need they don't need a heavy-handed message to tell them what they are. No, I agree. Yeah.
So, and that's, for me, that's a problem.
But it's a strange, well, I was listening to this, there's all these people, protesting Trump, right? And they're all progressives, and they're all protesting Trump, and they all think Trump is the devil. And maybe I don't like Trump, but they're all, but they're not protesting the president of Saudi Arabia and the president of China, and they're not protesting these really bad things that are happening. They've got all their focus on these petty sort of gender issues, and not that all the issues are petty, but people are Peterson's phrase is good. Ideological possession takes hold of people, and the way out of it is these kind of conversations that these guys are having.
This is a conundrum I didn't solve yet, because I was wondering, why could it be that a consciousness or a group of people, like, say, postmodern people who claim to be globalist and pluralistic and multicultural, devote their time on issues like that instead of climate change, solving the problem with the sea and the ocean pollution, with everything. So, but they but they are confined to these micro problems in a way, instead of, well, why don't you go ahead and solve the real problems?
Yeah, the big problems.
So why I don't understand this? Why they have the guts to like pose as advanced, but not at the same time approaching the real problems we have. And that is something I don't understand. So why?
Again, I think it has something to do with this infantilization, is that remaining infants for a long time, and not stepping into this sort of bigger role, and being obsessed with microaggressions and small petty things, personal psychological minutia,
right?
Rather than stepping out into the world and just and becoming strong men and strong women.
I'm just I how do I say this? I think because you mentioned Buddhism, and we talked a little bit about the connection of postmodernism and spirituality, and I think you have, as an adult and as a spiritual developed person, you have to go into the world and you have to deal with the problems at hand. You can't just stay in your spiritual community and do the next healing thing, and visit the next safe space, spiritual safe space. You have to go into the world and confront that and be that hero and to solve.
And I've been around in those communities, and I agree with you. I agree with you completely. You have to become a full human being in the world. I've seen a lot of people just become wounded and remain wounded because they're attached to a certain teacher or guru or path or they don't work with reality in direct enough a way.
Right.
So I agree with you there.
Andrew, I think we did it.
We did it? Okay,
yes.
Cool. Big pleasure talking to you. Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode of Lateral Conversations and you want to support my work in this podcast, you can do so by using the Patreon link or the donate button from PayPal, or you just can buy me a coffee. I will put the link below the episode. I want to thank everybody who already supports me. Very much appreciated. I hope you tune in next time. All the best to you guys. Have a good one.